Who or what is in first place in your life? I'm Steve Lusk with the Red Bank Church of Christ. And all this year, we've been looking at this little devotional book, My Family, try to encourage each other to be stronger disciples of Jesus Christ, to follow him more faithfully, more closely, and to encourage others to follow Jesus as well. This week, our devotionals center around the theme of putting God first. We need to think about and evaluate our priorities on a regular basis. And as followers of Jesus, we need to always put God first. Our devotional leader this week is David Shannon, president of Fred-Hardin University. And Brother Shannon has suggested some ways that we can show that we put God first, some ways that we need to order our priorities so that it demonstrates that we're putting God first in our lives. And the first thing he suggests has to do with our families. First of all, putting God first in our marriages. He points out that marriage was the first institution that God created. He made Adam and then made a helper for him, suitable for him, Eve. And he gave them some instructions. He gave them some work to do. He gave them some restrictions. And they were to live in accordance with his will. And that's ultimately what marriage is all about. It's to help each other live in accordance with God's will. And when our marriages are ordered properly, then that will be the most important thing for us, to encourage each other to get to heaven by doing God's will, by living in accordance with his will. And he points out that sometimes we even put good things before God. For example, he suggests that sometimes we put our children before the Lord. And certainly our children are very valuable, and at certain times in their lives, they're absolutely, they need our absolute urgent care and attention. And we understand that, and that's certainly not failing to put God first. In fact, it is putting God first by taking care of our children. But we can also get to the point where our children become more important than anything within the framework of God's will. What makes them happy? What do they want? What do we think that they need? What do others think that they need? And all these things can impact our priorities in terms of putting God first. Yes, our husbands and wives are important. Our marriages are important. Our children are important. But all are to be done in the framework of doing God's will. That's putting God first. Then he talks about the value of putting God first in terms of our material possessions. He points out that Matthew 6, verse 24, Jesus says that no one can serve two masters. You'll either love the one and hate the other, hold to the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and mammon or God and material things. That goes all the way back to the very first commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Put God first. Have no other gods before me. And sometimes we put our material possessions before God. So we can evaluate whether or not we are serving God and putting him first by the way we love and pay attention to our material possessions. Now, we're to be good stewards of the things that God's given us, the ways he's blessed us. We're to provide for our families. We are to work in order to earn a living. All of those things are important, but we do that within the framework of God's will. And so many times our possessions possess us rather than we use our possessions for the glory of God. Everything you own, everything you have, all that God's blessed you with should be a tool to carry out God's will and God's kingdom rule. In fact, Jesus said in that very same context that he said you can't serve two masters. He said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And all these things, all the stuff that we sometimes get so wrought up about, so worked up about, they'll be added to us. Are you putting God before material possessions, before the pursuit of things, the accumulation of things, the love of things? That's important that we do. And then finally, he says that we're to put God first in terms of what we truly love. I couldn't help but think about the message that Jesus sent through John the Revelation when he talked to the church at Ephesus. And he said, I have something against you. He said, you have left your first love. I think that's a good question for us to consider. Have I left my first love? Is my love really for God? When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest command? What's the most important command? He reflects back on that first command in the law of Moses, no other gods before me. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so do you really love God? Have you left your first love? Is the love of God the most important thing in your life? More important than your husband or your wife, more important than your children, more important than your material possessions, more important than your job or other kinds of pursuits? Is the love of God the most important thing in your life? And does everything that you do as a follower of Jesus flow from that love? You know, when it does, then we've got our priorities in order. And that's our prayer for you. That's what we hope and pray that you will do, that you will order your life so that God is always first. His kingdom is always first. Take a careful self-examination this week as we evaluate whether or not we're putting God first. And maybe there's some things that you need to reorder in your life. You need to make those right. You need to set those things straight. Evaluate your priorities. See if you're putting God first in your life. Our prayer is that you do. Thank you so much for joining us today, and you have a great day.